Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about dyslexia treatment. There's so many different types of treatments offered out there, and some of them are really overpriced. And so I thought we would go into dyslexia treatment a little bit and what I used that helped my son. So first of all, before we can talk about treatment, we need to talk about types of dyslexia. I'm not going to go into all of the different types. Those are easy to Google and look up online. But suffice it to say, you need to kind of have a general idea as to what type of dyslexia your child has in order to treat it properly. Now, there are educational psychologists out there that you can take your child to, and they will test them for dyslexia. You just contact them ahead of time and ask them if they can do dyslexia testing. Some of them can, and some of them can even do some treatments. And there's also the other test I would for sure get with your child is take them to a developmental optometrist. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when I'm talking about treatment. But they actually catch things that are not caught on a normal vision check, like how your brain molds the images from your right and left eye together, how your eyes team to put together one image so you're not looking at double vision when you're reading, or how smooth your eye can track across the letters and the page, and later on when the child's reading more, how they can jump from one word to the next. That's all motor control, controlled in the brain. And if your child has a problem with any of those, they can have dyslexia, and it's actually a super easy problem to fix. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. But an educational psychologist can kind of test them. A developmental optometrist can rule out those problems for you. Okay, so the one that developmental optometrists can help with are the ones that are more visual and motoric, like I just talked about. And that's called dyseidetic. Dyseidetic and motoric dyslexia. And that really deals with the word form area and, like I said, your visual control. Okay, so I just pulled this up because there is also a type of dyslexia called Dysphonitic Dyslexia. And this is very common. And it means that the child has a problem with the Wernicke area and some other areas, but primarily the Wernicke area of the brain that is responsible for phonetic awareness. And that's why a lot of the treatments kind of pound phonics into their head to get it to stick and to be retained. But this one is where they're combining different sounds, like the EL together to make the L sound, or the PHANT to make the funt, and then putting them together with a meaning that these characters that look like this actually mean one of these. And that is actually something that dyslexic children have a very hard time with. And so that one is, again, dysphonetic dyslexia. Sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you, some children that are diagnosed with dyslexia, sometimes they just have auditory processing disorder, which means they aren't taking language in, they don't process the command you give them, like you give them a 3-part command, go upstairs, grab your shoes, come back, and they hear the first one and they don't hear all of them, and that affects their reading. As a matter of fact, over 50% of children with dyslexia also can be diagnosed with auditory processing. So it really contributes because it affects how that phonological part of their brain decodes language, okay? Some children have a problem where they just have attention problems. They're either ADD, attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and that makes them so they can't pay attention long enough to learn to read, and they can't sit there long enough to read. And sometimes they're kind of hyper like that and have some problems with auditory processing and other things too that can affect their reading. And so you're kind of like, so what do I do? Do I get them treatment for their attention issue, or go get them treatment for visual or for the phonetic part? So we're going to talk about the treatments now, okay? So an educational psychologist is cool because they can usually go in and say they have some problems visually as well as auditory as well as attention, and they can kind of give you the breakdown as to what's going on. They'll test them in different ways to find out which ones of those areas they're just like weak in and need stimulation. The cool thing is, it used to be said that there was no cure to dyslexia, that all you can do is learn to accommodate and help the child that way. And this is so untrue. There are stimulations now for every one of those areas that I talked about. There's equipment developed. Okay, sorry, we're back. My computer glitched out for a minute and I couldn't figure it out. So anyway, we're back. So there are brain stimulations and specialists to help in every single one of those areas. And also there are a lot of exercises you can just do at home with your child and help him out. I did it with my son. He actually had problems with auditory and visual and phonetic, and he reads well now. He reads thick books for enjoyment. So yeah, you can definitely help them, and you can help them at home. But it does help to take them and get them diagnosed and see what areas they need help in. And then we can talk about how to stimulate and help those areas. So occupational therapists will help too. Some of them specialize in learning disabilities, and there's reading specialists. And you can go to them. They kind of, because most of the information I'm going to talk about is kind of coming forward now or becoming more popular, being learned now that we have the fMRI scans that can actually scan a brain while it's reading and see what parts are not working that should be and what parts do work in a healthy brain. And so some of these therapists, they're awesome. They do help your child improves, but they don't always have the latest cutting edge information because they went to school a couple years ago and this information's coming forward now. And some of them do stay up to date. They take, all of them take continuing ed, but some of them fall into the right courses of continuing ed classes that give them this new information. So all of them can be helpful, and we're going to talk about some other clinics and things like that that can be helpful. Neurofeedback centers are really popular right now, actually in the corporate world, because corporations will send their people to neurofeedback centers to give them a brain boost and make them have better attention spans and better retention in memory and things like that. And what these centers do is they actually have all kinds of equipment that you're given a task and it immediately feeds the result of your task back to your brain. So your brain immediately knows, was I a little bit off on that, or was I right on that? And your brain is very smart. It can rebuild connections, it can reroute connections, strengthen connections to solve a problem when it says, hey, I was a little bit off on that. For example, there's this place that's interactive metronome is what they're called, and they found that children with dyslexia usually also don't have rhythm. And rhythm, correct rhythm, good rhythm, is actually a development of the brain, and your brain works on rhythms, wavelength rhythms in your brain. And so with interactive metronome, you can go do this with your child. They get to watch a screen while they're hitting something rhythmically, and it gives them immediate feedback. You're slightly behind the beat, you're slightly above the beat. And when they get right on, their brain has formed better neurological connections that help in all areas of their brain. And so it's kind of a form of neurofeedback, to give you an example. All of those things help great. So there's also, let's talk about these. So there's reading and learning disability centers, and I went and checked out a whole bunch of them, and almost all of them just pound phonetics and decoding into kids. Some of them use multisensory, like the Orton Gillingham is heavy in multisensory, and then also phonetics, and teaching them whether a syllable is an open syllable or a closed syllable, and they just spend hours doing phonetics. Now, this is important. These kids are behind on their phonetics, but there's things that need to be caught up in their brain before they're going to retain that. That's why reading an hour a night hasn't helped so far. That's why doing these, pounding the phonetics in, it takes them a very long time to really retain them. Like, you can pound it into their head and the next day they don't remember it. They act like they're reading Greek, like they've never seen those words before. And that's because there's actually parts in the brain that need to be stimulated before you go and put those phonetics and decoding skills and things into their brain. Or you can kind of do them at the same time, simultaneously, but you really need to do some brain stimulation in the weak areas of the brain if you ever want them to retain those well and at a rapid speed. Most of these kids are a couple years behind because they just learn so much slower because their brain works differently. The reason multisensory helps is because they're taking the information in more than just visually or auditory. And this is important because most kids with dyslexia struggle, like I said, with vision and auditory. And so it's like trying to read like this. Yeah, like totally impossible, right? I mean, obviously they hear, but their brain is not using that information and connecting it like it should. And so they have children like write in the sand, form their letters out of Play-Doh, and do all kinds of things, multisensory, tap the letters out on their arm, like D-O-G, D-O-G. And then they have a feeling when they go to write it on their paper and they write D-G, they tap it out, wait, there's something missing, D-O-G, and it helps them remember. So multisensory is cool, and I actually encourage people to use multisensory while they are brain stimulating their child so that it helps them get better quicker and helps them have some like immediate results on spelling tests and things like that. The other problem these children have is their self-esteem is crushed by the third grade because they're not doing what the other kids are doing, and they can tell, and they've heard the kids snicker, and so self-esteem is a big problem. And so to boost that and help them walk out on a Friday with like a 80% on a spelling test instead of a 20% is huge right off the bat. So I do encourage multisensory, and always talking about phonics when you're looking at their spelling test, to point some of the phonics blends out, make them circle them, underline them, color them with different highlighter markers, like each one is different. And that does help. Right off the bat, it helps. But I like to go a little bit deeper and find the areas of the brain that are underactive and stimulate those to be more active. And we'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of these reading and learning centers do the phonics and the decoding and even the multisensory, but they don't do the brain stimulation that's so important. And here's why. So they've done a bunch of studies and found that most of the areas of the brain that are used for reading, you don't do anything without using both sides of your brain, but it's primarily in the left side of the brain in most people. And those areas are underactive. The Wernicke area, the word form, where they keep their word lexicon. And Dr. Robert Melillo, he actually travels all over the world and lectures now because he worked with these kids and found out that, hey, their other left brain skills are really low, but their right brain skills like spatial awareness, creativity, intuition, reading people's faces are super high. They're super, super above average at all of these things. And left brain skills need some work. And so he actually discovered that if he could do little simulations to bring the left side up to be more even with the right side, well, now connection happened between the right and left brain better. You can't read without using both halves of the brain, and it had an underactive side and an overactive side, and that made the connection between the two not work as well. They called this disconnection syndrome. So he actually went and co-founded the Brain Balance Centers. And so if you're going to use a center, I highly recommend the Brain Balance Centers because they use these techniques that I'm talking about. I trained directly with him, and so my dyslexia course and my free videos that I'll link to below actually use these techniques as well. So, but, you know, if you're going to take them to a center, that's my favorite one. Every kid is different, but that is why I love the Brain Balance Centers over the other ones. Even over the neurofeedback and neuroplasticity centers. All of them kind of use neuroplasticity approach. It used to be believed that you just had whatever brain you were born with or that grew, and you could not change it. And it is absolutely untrue. They discovered neuroplasticity means that you can improve areas of your brain, reroute around areas of your brain that have been damaged. They've had people completely recover from strokes. Kids that are born with ADHD completely stimulate the part of their brain that brings them up just fine. Harvard actually just did a study on Dr. Robert Melillo and ADHD, and he not only worked with dyslexic kids, but ADHD kids. And it's really cool because after the treatment of stimulating one side of the brain and bringing them up, then they actually, in the study it's written, and I'll link to this study, in the study it's written that they no longer met the criteria for ADHD, meaning they weren't ADHD anymore, Were they perfect? No, maybe they were still, you know, a little twitchy and impulsive, but they were not to the level. They were severe ADHD kids, and helped them. And it was just by stimulating the parts of the brain and using this approach that Dr. Robert Melillo uses. So it's really cool. So my recommendation is, if you're going to do a treatment for your child, have it be a brain-based treatment. I mean, I know all of them are, because if you're studying phonics, it goes into your brain. But have it be a brain stimulating specifically to the ones that will actually check and see which hemisphere is underactive and stimulate it. The other thing I did for my son, I was doing that for him. It was going great, but he still was having problems with seeing the words. He'd get nauseous when he looked at a book, or he would see the words would appear as if the letters changed or moved around. And so we took him to what's called a behavioral optometrist. They do vision therapy. I mentioned him a minute ago. And they tested, and they found out that his eyes would skip and bounce and do this as he was trying to read across a line. The motor control of his eyes was not smooth. Now, this is something that can be corrected. They also saw that he had a word form, or not a word form, a what was it? A shape perception. I can't remember what it was called, but it meant that when you look at a shape, his brain didn't always take him in that looked the same. So we might see a square, and my son may have seen like 3/4 of a square. Or you might see a B, and that's backwards there for you. And he might see part of that B. And when you look back, it looks a little different. And his eyes also weren't teaming well, so he always saw a letter and a little shadow of a letter behind it and to the right. So all of these things were taking place in his vision when he was trying to read across a sentence, okay? And couple that with a little bit of brain imbalance issues, and it was a huge problem for him. Once we did those two things, we stimulated the left hemisphere of his brain, and we got him into a vision therapist who helped him. It was only a 12-week process, super easy. And once we did those two things, now he reads well. As a matter of fact, he walked in one day and was like, "Hey, Mom, by the way, I don't think I'm dyslexic anymore." And I was like, oh my gosh. So I talk about this in our 3-part video series if you want to go see that. But treatment is so important, and the sooner you get it, the better. If you don't want to do the treatment I've been talking about, go do some treatment. The ones that do focus on phonics and stuff, it does get through, it does get retained. It takes longer, but it works. It's a long process, but it works in time. And but I definitely recommend finding the weak areas and stimulating them. That's kind of what our whole website is about, because it worked so well for my son that I wanted to share it with the world. So we made this website for all of you people out there who have children struggling with reading. So good luck on that, and good luck on the treatments. And we'll see you back here on my next post.